This paper is an extension of some work that was published in the International Journal of Training Research last year, where I looked at the Certificate 4 in Training Assessment and did analysis of the curriculum against a set of knowledge bases. And I'm assuming that everyone in the room will know of the Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment and the Diploma in Training and Assessment. The Diploma in Vet Practice is a Victorian accredited qualification and was specifically developed in response to the industrial conditions in the Victorian system. And the reason I've looked at the Dip Vet Practice is as a comparison with the Diploma in Training and Assessment, which is entirely competency standards-based and nationally accredited program. I'd like to firstly make a couple of comments about teachers' knowledge. The first being that the notion of teachers' knowledge is a contested idea as to what constitutes legitimised teachers' knowledge based on a set of assumptions that underpin that decision making. There have been some quite comprehensive reviews of the teacher knowledge literature, mainly out of the United States, and they have dealt mainly with the primary and secondary school environment. The amount of review of vocational teachers' practice is very limited. So in quick review, the dominant perspectives in terms of teacher knowledge are the scientific technicist approach or the process product approach, which tends to try and identify teaching practices which are measurable and observable, result in an improvement in student achievement, followed by interest in the sort of interpretive phenomenological approach, which has taken a more social view of teachers' knowledge. And there is a small amount of literature that looks at it from a critical perspective. What I'm going to use today is the notion of the 12 knowledge bases described by Turner-Bissett. There are other models available, and they're identified in the paper that you can find in the proceedings. Turner-Bissett model builds on the work of other researchers. Many of you will know the work of Schulman with the introduction of the idea of pedagogic content knowledge. She talks about the notion of subject knowledge, both substantive or the content knowledge itself, or the syntactic subject knowledge, which relates to the way in which knowledge in a particular vocational discipline is formed. If we look at vocational teachers who typically come to vocational teaching with a strong background in their own primary discipline, it would be reasonable to assume that they come to the vocational sector with already well-developed subject knowledge in both the substantive and syntactic categories. She talks about knowledge of learners from an empirical and a cognitive perspectives. The empirical is relations to clearly things like gender and age, cultural background, and also the knowledge of learners from a cognitive perspective, which learning styles, learning preferences, and other cognitive. I've clumped together the issues of our knowledge of curriculum, educational context, educational ends, purposes and values. They all, to me, seem to be associated with the knowledge of the system. And then beliefs about the subject one is teaching, beliefs about teaching and what constitutes good teaching practice, and beliefs about oneself as a practitioner, which goes to that notion of teacher identity. And then the two categories of pedagogic knowledge, one being general pedagogic knowledge and the other being pedagogic content knowledge. General pedagogic knowledge being those sorts of sets of skills that one develops in order to do the management of teaching and learning, whereas pedagogic content knowledge, in Schulman's idea, is an amalgam of general pedagogic knowledge with content knowledge, would differentiate the expert teacher from the novice teacher. In Turner-Bissett's model, it's a slightly different conception, but Turner-Bissett would argue that in order to be able to demonstrate pedagogic content knowledge, one has to have all of the other knowledges. So what I did essentially, language analysis, looking for evidence of these knowledge bases in the curriculum, asking the question, if completed to a minimum standard, does the Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment, Diploma in Training and Assessment, so on, provide the potential for developing the full suite of teachers' knowledge bases as proposed by Turner-Bissett? To paraphrase that, does it provide the potential to develop the knowledge bases that are required of an expert teacher? Across the horizontal at the top, there are all the 12 knowledge bases of Turner-Bissett. What I found evidence of in the Certificate for Training and Assessment is evidence for the development or assessment of knowledge bases, with the exception of pedagogic content knowledge, importantly, but I can find no evidence of an explicit intention to assess their beliefs about themselves as teachers, their beliefs about teaching, or to assess their beliefs about subjects. The conclusion clearly from that in terms of turn of visit is it lacks the wherewithal for participants to have the potential to develop pedagogic content knowledge. Now, I'm not suggesting that in some implementations that might not happen. What I'm saying is that in terms of the curriculum, it's not there. In terms of the diploma in training and assessment, I can find evidence of some development in all categories, and I can also find in the diploma in vet practice development in all categories. However, and if I come back to the Certificate for Training and Assessment, it's largely, as other people have talked about, descriptive, applied, uncritical, provide no opportunity to look at systems beyond what is the government official line. So there are really strong opportunities to demonstrate ability to use the legitimised approach to deal with training packages, which is what it's designed to do. More limited opportunities in terms of developing the knowledge of learners and even general pedagogic knowledge. No potential for the development of pedagogic content knowledge. Now, should that be seen as a criticism of the Certificate for in Training and Assessment? Well, it depends on what the purpose of the Certificate for in Training and Assessment is. If it is a licensing course, in order that you can say, yes, I know how to use the authorised system, it's a successful program. If it's the minimum qualification required of someone to work in a complex, non-routine environment where they're required to make decisions that are multidimensional, then according to my analysis, you would argue that it doesn't provide the wherewithal for that. These are the descriptors for AQF4 and AQF5. And what I've argued in the paper is that whilst it's legitimate to say, in the case of Certificate 4, that providing the potential to develop a minimum set of skills but not pedagogic content knowledge is a perfectly legitimate outcome. When one looks at the descriptors in an AQF5 at a diploma, maybe the answer to the question is not quite so certain, because you start to see in the AQF words that are associated with the level of responsibility and the level of autonomy, transfer and apply theoretical concepts, evaluate information. We're really talking about quite high-level activities. To go on to the Diploma in Training and Assessment, I found it very difficult to find evidence of explicit critique of existing policies and practice. There's certainly evidence of consolidation of the general pedagogic knowledge, and beliefs about subjects, teaching and self are evident in the curriculum, but it's restricted, in my view, to one competency. Now, it might be some heresy to talk about nominal hours and one competency, I know, but one has to ask about the possibility, if examination of beliefs about self, teaching and subject are limited to one competency, is that adequate to provide a solid foundation for the development of pedagogic content knowledge? But certainly there's a possibility for at least the development, the expression of all of the knowledge bases of turn of visit at some level. And if we look at the diploma in vet practice, again, what we see is the opportunity to develop a full suite of knowledge bases. In this case, in addition to these are modules that go to make up, there's a 200-hour teacher practicum which incorporates 50 hours of supervised teaching practice plus 150 hours of other teacherly duty. Now that's a nominated amount in the diploma in vet practice, and certainly the diploma in training and assessment designed as a workplace-based training program. So I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that people doing the diploma in training and assessment don't engage in teaching practice, but certainly it's not quantified. It's about performance and beliefs about subject, self and teaching. And in the diploma in vet practice restricted to one module. Based on this analysis, there is the potential for the development of pedagogic content knowledge. The question still remains to whether it is adequate to form a solid base for continued development. There are really, I think, two general conclusions that I would like to draw. The first is that there are frameworks like teachers' knowledge bases which do give us a way auditing the teacher training programs. Does the Certificate 4 provide an opportunity to develop the competencies of an expert teacher? No. Does the Diploma in Training and Assessment? Does the Diploma in Vet Practice? I suspect it depends more on the implementation.